All right, guys, so this is going to be a fun one. A couple of days ago, Hillary Rodham Clinton went on Jimmy Fallon's late night show, and part of the conversation that they had was essentially Hillary Clinton scolding voters who are upset that we are stuck with Trump and Biden as the main candidates in the rematch that absolutely nobody wanted to see. And so we're going to watch this clip, and then we're going to get into Stephen A. Smith and his absolutely brutal takedown of Hillary Clinton, because for some reason he was doing this interview on CNN and they ended up talking about Hillary. But let's just go ahead and watch this first clip here.
But it's Biden versus Trump.
Yes,
we know that.
It is. It is.
What do you say to voters who are upset that those are the two choices?
Get over yourself. Those are the two choices.
Yeah, love that.
Right? And
good.
you know, it's kind of like one is old and effective and compassionate, has a heart, and really cares about people, and one is old and has been charged with 91 felonies.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean,
okay. Interesting.
I don't understand why this is even a hard choice, really. I
Yeah.
don't understand it.
Yeah.
But we have to go through the election, and hopefully people will realize what's at stake, because it's an existential question. What kind of country we're going to have, what kind of democracy we're going to have. And people who blow that off are not paying attention, because it's not like Trump, his enablers, his empowerers, his allies are not telling us what they want to do. I mean, they're pretty clear about what kind of country they want.
Yeah.
So.
Get out there and vote. But it's Biden.
Okay. Listen, guys, at this point, I'm genuinely convinced that Democrats need to get Hillary Clinton and kind of just like lock her in a basement until the election takes place, at least, because there is not a single American, not a single one, who is currently hesitant to support Joe Biden, who is somehow going to be convinced by Hillary Clinton scolding them to go and do so. There's not a single person who that would apply to. Every single time that she comes out and she speaks like this and talks down to people and pretends as if there's no legitimate critique of Joe Biden that could possibly be had, Joe Biden is losing voters, okay? And so now we're going to get to the Stephen A. Smith brutal takedown of Hillary Clinton, and then I'll give you some more thoughts that I have on Hillary's original clip there.
I don't think it was a very wise statement on her part. How did that work out for her in 2016? I think that's something that we have to recognize. Yes, she won a popular vote, but at the end of the day, she wasn't the president of the United States. It was him. You can look at her not campaigning in Wisconsin in the last days, not campaigning in Pennsylvania in the last days. You can look at some of the stuff that they were saying about her that sort of distracted things from where it should have been in terms of Comey and his report from the FBI. You can bring up a whole bunch of things, but at the end of the day, the last thing you need to do is to do anything that could agitate a potential voter in this particular election.
What do you make about the actual argument that she's making? I mean, she's basically saying two old people, yes, but they're substantively different. I mean, Trump
Absolutely.
has 91 counts against him.
Well,
And
listen,
if you're
nobody's brought that up more than me. Four indictments, 91 counts, impeached twice. I'm not voting for him. I've said that to a lot of people. I've said that to you. But at the end of the day, what I'm saying is that at some point in time, you got to take into account what the voters thinking about. The voters, a lot of them out there, tens of millions of them out there, by the way, don't care what he's going through right now. They don't care about his guilt or innocence, his perceived guilt or innocence. They don't care about the 91 counts. They're thinking about their lives. And a lot of times we see politicians taking the positions that they're taking. And while we can respect their candor and their honesty, they do seem a bit detached at times from what the voters are actually feeling and what the voters are actually thinking. Nobody wants to hear that from Hillary Rodham Clinton at this particular moment in time, because especially if you're Joe Biden, what are you really worried about right now? You're worried about folks coming to the polls. You're worried about them showing up to the polls to vote for you. You're not worried even about them voting for Trump. You're worried about them not showing up to vote for you. That doesn't exactly encourage them to get up out of their seats and go to the polls.
Okay, so, I mean, he's pretty much 100% correct there. I mean, in the first point of, like, who the hell is Hillary Clinton? The person who helped to get us Trump in the first place, losing the 2016 election, didn't go and campaign in a lot of these swing states, just kind of assumed that she was going to win, didn't understand the political moment of the time. Who are you to come out and to scold voters, right? So that point is absolutely true. It's also true in the sense of, what he's describing here, at least half true, I think, because I do think that the 91 criminal charges that Hillary was talking about, I do think that's going to be relevant. I mean, according to the polling data that I've seen, it is a large chunk of the American people that if, and this is a big if, we have some of these cases that end up, going to trial, and imagine that Trump is, convicted or found guilty on some of those charges, that could have a serious impact in terms of people's decision on the 2024 election. So that's true at the same time as what Stephen A. was saying is true, which is that, maybe that'll have some impact. Maybe it won't. Maybe people will be more focused on, kitchen table issues or how the economy is doing, or do they feel better off now than they did under the Trump administration? housing prices continue to be completely unaffordable for a huge chunk of the American people. An entire generation is locked out of the housing market, effectively. My generation, right? You have all of these different issues on healthcare and on education and student debt and all of these different issues that really have not been substantively addressed, okay? And so the question is like, well, how much is just pointing out that Donald Trump is obviously a con man? He's obviously a fraud. He's obviously facing numerous different criminal indictments. How much is just relying on the Trump is bad narrative going to be effective, right? And I seriously question for anybody out there, right? Try to give me a list of maybe 5 or so, or even one would probably be a challenge. A couple of different concrete policy items that Joe Biden is running on if he is reelected, right? Because there's a lot of talk from the Biden administration, again, about how bad Trump is and how much of a threat he is to democracy, which I actually agree with to a large extent. But how much talk is there about what your campaign is, right? What are you running on? What are you going to do if Democrats get the Senate, they get the House, they, get Joe Biden reelected? What is your actual policy agenda? There really isn't one. I mean, there's a lot of criticizing Trump. There's a lot of, focus on some of the half-assed achievements that Biden has managed to get through. And I've given him applause in some circumstances for certain bills that he's managed to get through, even though, again, they were kind of half-assed and he allowed members of his own party and Republicans to rip them to shreds in the name of some bullshit bipartisanship and whatever. We don't have to rehash all of that. But I mean, what is the actual campaign right now that the Joe Biden administration is trying to run? I mean, this is a guy who not only is elderly, right, but is also so mentally not with it that he's not even able to go and do a full campaign, right? How many interviews has Joe Biden done? This is the same guy who refused or who declined to do a pre-Super Bowl interview, which would have been seen by millions and millions of Americans, obviously the biggest platform you could possibly ask for, and he declined to do that. Why did he decline to do that? Why is he giving less interviews than almost any president in modern American history? It's because, I think to a large extent, many of the people around him, and maybe even Joe Biden himself, they know that he's lost a step. And they know that he's constantly fumbling over his words and that, his mental decline is on obvious display. We've all seen it. We've all covered it a million different times this Sunday. So we all understand that that's a lot of what's behind the weaknesses of his campaign. And so I guess instead you have people like Hillary Clinton coming out as sort of like surrogates, I guess, or people who are speaking on Joe Biden's behalf. And the deeper part about what Hillary was saying here, get over yourself. These are the two choices. As Stephen A. Smith was pointing out, it's actually not two choices here. Number one, you have other candidates who are running in the race. You have RFK Jr., who I personally disagree with on a whole host of issues. I wouldn't vote for RFK Jr., but he's polling, pretty significantly. I'll show you some of those polls here in a second. You also have Cornel West. You also have Jill Stein. So you have like 3 other candidates who are running in this race. So you have another choice, right? Even though Hillary's saying there's only 2 choices here. Well, really, there are more choices than that, right? You may say, well, there's only 2 choices who have a plausible chance of winning. Okay, that's probably fair enough. But it's not the only choice. The other choice that she doesn't mention here, which is something that Stephen A. pointed out, is that people are just going to stay home. That's the biggest risk for Joe Biden's reelection campaign. It's not that his voters or lefties who are mad that he's supporting a genocide right now in Gaza, it's not that they're going to go out and vote for Trump. It's that they're going to stay home or they're going to vote for a third party. So to just brush this off and to literally say, she says, get over yourself. Get over yourself. The audacity of people like Hillary Clinton, other establishment politicians, to just assume we own your votes by default. We don't have to go out and earn the votes. We can spit in your face over and over and over again, and you have to go and vote for us. Because look, that other guy's worse. And it's like, well, yeah, on many issues, Trump is significantly worse than Joe Biden, right? I could describe in detail how Joe Biden's policy agenda, his economic policy, is markedly different from Joe Biden or from Donald Trump. There are significant substantive differences there, right? Look at Joe Biden's NLRB, his National Labor Relations Board. Look at his FTC that is trying to crack down on various given monopolies in the United States. There are some bright spots there. I can definitely point to the nuanced differences between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, but that's really not the question here. The question is not, everybody has to go to the polls and choose between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, and isn't that such an easy choice? That's not how politics works. That's not how elections work. And we're dealing with a situation right now where Joe Biden has faced massive numbers in terms of especially the uncommitted votes in several key swing states. I mean, Wisconsin and Michigan and several others as well, where tens of thousands have come to the polls in the primary election just to make their disagreement with Joe Biden's handling of Israel and Gaza explicitly clear. Okay? The margins of the amount of people who have voted uncommitted in just these primaries has already far eclipsed the margins that Joe Biden won with in 2020. So, when we have polling data like this that's coming out, Trump leads Biden in 6 of 7 swing states, according to this recent Wall Street Journal poll. I mean, granted, this is just one poll, but it's similar to many other polls that we've seen recently. I mean, 6 out of 7 swing states. If you look at the national average, which isn't necessarily useful because, again, the swing states are really, where you need to look. But as this polling indicates, it's 6 of 7 that Trump is currently leading. But at the national level, Trump leading by, 0.8, close to 1% here. Biden has had some uptick recently, a slight uptick in the national averages of polling. But I mean, Trump is still leading slightly there. So it's a coin toss, right? You add in the other candidates. That was a head-to-head matchup that we were just looking at there with a slight Trump lead. You add in, RFK, you add in Cornel West, you add in Jill Stein, and, it's a 2-point gap. Now, maybe that's within the margin of error. I mean, this is an average of several different, sort of reputable polling outlets. So, I mean, it's a coin flip at this point. And the funny part about this is that, like, as Hillary is putting it there in that such a simplistic way, right? Well, here you have an old man who's compassionate, and maybe he forgets things sometimes, but, he's an effective leader. And then you have Trump, who's also old and also is a criminal. And she portrays it in this simplistic way that is not going to be effective in any way, shape, or form in terms of not only motivating people to get to the polls, but also in terms of, like, trying to get to an analysis of why Joe Biden is losing right now to Donald Trump. I mean, think about that. We know all of the glaring flaws of Donald Trump, all of the threats, all of the horrendous consequences that would come if he's reelected. But people like Hillary Clinton and the establishment of the Democratic Party, and even Joe Biden himself, they want to pin the blame of this current polling situation. They want to pin the blame of a potential second Trump term on the voters themselves being stupid or whatever, right? Or being narcissistic, right? She says, get over yourselves. It's as if she believes that the voters are being narcissistic, instead of it being that Joe Biden is such a historically weak candidate that he's losing to a guy like Donald Trump. How is that possible? How is it possible that Trump, with the 91 charges, the multiple different indictments that he's facing, his history of being a con man, and he's banned from doing business in New York because of his rampant fraud in the city, all of these different things that are stacking up against Trump, January 6th, trying to overturn the last election, everything that he's promising to do, his dictatorial ambitions, and yet, even with all of those glaring flaws, Joe Biden is losing to him. But it's like people like Hillary Clinton have no ability whatsoever to look internally, to criticize their own party, and to say maybe this isn't just the voters' fault. Maybe it's a little bit of a warning sign that our main guy, Joe Biden, is doing so horrendously against an incredibly weak candidate like Donald Trump. And that's really what this election is. This election is not a race to the top, it's a race to the bottom. It is a competition to see who the American people hate the most on election day. That's what this is about. Neither of these guys is popular, right? I mean, they all have their own, the base, especially Trump has like a dedicated, almost like cult-like following behind him. But in terms of the overall American people, most people overwhelmingly disapprove of Donald Trump. Most people overwhelmingly disapprove of Joe Biden. How do we, as the wealthiest country in the history of the world, okay, the superpower of the world right now, 330 million some odd people in this country, and somehow we are stuck with Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Again, the rematch that absolutely nobody wanted to see. So shout out to, Stephen A. Smith for coming out, criticizing Hillary Clinton, putting her a little bit in her place there. I like how he basically was talking about Hillary Clinton as if he was like giving an analysis of like, somebody else pointed this out, but like Zion Williamson or like some other NBA player as he does, right? He's a sports commentator. He's not a political commentator. But I mean, clearly he at least is in touch with some of the basics here. because he's running circles around Hillary Clinton.